You're listening to Long Listen, a space for deep dives into books that shape how we think, work, and live. No hype, no shortcuts, just thoughtful analysis, honest reflection, and conversations about ideas that deserve more than a 5-minute summary. Let me ask you something. Have you noticed how often people say this these days? I don't care anymore. Whatever. It is what it is. At some point, not caring stopped being a coping mechanism and started becoming an identity. We say it like a badge of maturity, like proof that we've figured life out. As if the less we care, the more evolved we are. And on the surface, it sounds freeing. Letting go. Staying unbothered. Protecting your peace. But here's a question we rarely sit with long enough to feel uncomfortable. If not caring is freedom, why do so many of us still feel exhausted? Why do we wake up tired, even after a full night's sleep? Why do our minds keep running in circles, replaying conversations, comparing timelines, wondering if we're falling behind? Why does a generation that constantly says, "I don't care," struggle so deeply with anxiety, burnout, and quiet loneliness? This idea didn't come out of nowhere. Over the last decade, books like The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F**k gave people language for something they were already feeling. The promise was simple and seductive. Life gets better not when you care more, but when you choose what deserves your care. And honestly, that sounds right. It still does. Most of us care too much about things that drain us and too little about things that actually matter. The book wasn't wrong. But today, this podcast isn't about praising the book or tearing it down. It's not about summarizing chapters or extracting neat little lessons. It's about something more uncomfortable. What happens when not caring becomes a misunderstanding instead of a skill? What happens when we use indifference as armor, not wisdom? When living for yourself quietly turns into emotional distance? When the desire to protect our peace slowly disconnects us from responsibility, from growth, from people who actually matter? Maybe the problem isn't that we care too little or too much. Maybe the real problem is that we're using the idea of not caring as a shortcut. A way to avoid disappointment. A way to avoid choosing. A way to avoid asking ourselves harder questions. This episode isn't here to tell you to care about everything. It's also not here to celebrate emotional numbness disguised as freedom. What we're trying to explore is the fragile line between not caring as clarity and not caring as escape. If you've ever felt tired without knowing exactly why, if you've ever wanted to give up but felt strangely guilty about it, or if you've caught yourself wondering whether you're actually living your own life or just reacting to it, then this conversation is for you. Not because it has answers, but because it might help you ask better questions. To be fair, before we question the idea of not caring, we need to start with honesty. The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F**k didn't become popular by accident. It didn't sell millions of copies because people were shallow or lazy. It resonated because it spoke directly to a quiet exhaustion that many young people carry, but rarely name. We live in a world that constantly demands more from us. More ambition, more clarity, more productivity, more happiness. From a very young age, we're taught that life is something to optimize, that if we just work harder, plan better, and think more positively, everything will eventually fall into place. And if it doesn't, then the failure must be personal. Mark Manson opens his book with a blunt rejection of that mindset. Everything worthwhile in life is won through surmounting the associated negative experience, he writes. Life, according to him, is not about feeling good all the time. It's about choosing which problems are worth having. And for many readers, that sentence alone feels like permission to finally exhale. Because the truth is, we care too much. We care about how we're perceived. We care about keeping up. We care about being interesting, successful, attractive, and fulfilled, often all at the same time. Social media quietly amplifies this pressure, turning other people's highlight reels into standards we measure ourselves against. Even rest becomes something we feel guilty about. In that context, the idea of not giving a fuck sounds almost radical. It suggests that peace doesn't come from fixing everything, but from letting go of things that drain us. Manson argues that our values matter more than our goals, and that suffering is inevitable, so we might as well choose suffering aligned with who we are. This is where the book gets something deeply right. It refuses to sugarcoat life. It echoes ideas found in Stoic philosophy, where thinkers like Epictetus reminded us that it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. The book pulls people away from endless self-improvement and asks them to confront a simpler, harder truth. You can't care about everything, and trying to do so will destroy you. For many young adults, especially those burned out before they even feel like they've begun, this message feels grounding. It gives language to a feeling they've carried for years. It reassures them that feeling lost or overwhelmed isn't a personal defect, but a consequence of misplaced values. But here's where life complicates the idea. The book talks about choosing values, but it assumes a level of clarity that many people don't yet have. When you're in your 20s, or even your 30s, you're often still figuring out who you are. Your values aren't stable. They're shaped by trial, error, failure, and contradiction. Asking someone in that stage of life to simply care less can easily turn into emotional withdrawal rather than intentional choice. Manson himself writes, "You and everyone you know are going to die soon." The reminder of mortality is meant to sharpen perspective. But for some readers, it doesn't lead to clarity. It leads to nihilism. If nothing lasts, why try? If everything is meaningless, why commit? This is where not caring quietly shifts from wisdom to avoidance. In everyday life, this shows up in subtle ways. Someone leaves a job not because it's wrong for them, but because it's uncomfortable. A relationship ends not because it's unhealthy, but because it requires effort and vulnerability. Responsibilities are reframed as burdens. Emotional distance is mistaken for self-respect. The language of the book becomes a shield. I'm just protecting my peace. I don't owe anyone anything. I'm choosing myself. And sometimes those statements are absolutely valid. Boundaries matter. Self-respect matters. But when taken too far, they can turn into a refusal to engage with life as it actually is: messy, demanding, and often inconvenient. There's a quote often attributed to Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, who said, "When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure." In a modern context, we might add emotional detachment to that list of distractions. Not caring becomes a way to avoid asking harder questions about purpose, responsibility, and contribution. Even Marcus Aurelius, often cited by modern self-help culture, warned against misinterpreting Stoicism as emotional coldness. In Meditations, he writes about duty, service, and participation in the world. Stoicism was never about withdrawing from life. It was about engaging with it without being consumed. This distinction matters, especially for young people navigating an unstable world. Economic uncertainty, social pressure, and constant comparison make it tempting to emotionally disengage. When caring feels like pain, indifference feels like safety. But safety and growth rarely coexist. The book encourages readers to accept responsibility for their choices. You are responsible for everything in your life, no matter the external circumstances. Manson writes. Yet responsibility without compassion can easily turn into self-blame or avoidance. If everything is your fault, one way to cope is to stop caring altogether. This is the quiet paradox of the book. It offers freedom, but only if the reader already has the maturity to hold discomfort without running from it. Without that maturity, not caring becomes less about values and more about numbing. And this isn't a moral failure. It's human. When people are overwhelmed, they don't seek growth, they seek relief. The danger lies in mistaking relief for resolution. A famous line by writer David Foster Wallace comes to mind. There is no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. In the same way, there is no such thing as not caring. We always care about something. The question is whether we're conscious of what that something is. So perhaps the real question isn't whether we should care less. It's whether we understand what we're caring about at all. Not caring, when done well, comes from clarity. It's the result of knowing your values, accepting trade-offs, and staying present with discomfort. Not caring, when done poorly, is a defense mechanism, a way to avoid disappointment, intimacy, and the risk of trying. Young people often stand right at the edge of that distinction. They're tired, uncertain, and still forming their sense of self. In that space, a book like The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F*ck can either become a tool for intentional living or a justification for retreat. And that's why this conversation matters. Before asking what deserves less of our energy, we may need to ask something quieter and more honest. Are we letting go because we've understood what matters, or because we're afraid to find out? Not caring is not a bad idea. In fact, it is one of the most important skills an adult can learn. You cannot live a grounded life if every comment, every expectation, every opinion has the power to shake you. At its best, not caring helps you conserve energy, stay clear-headed, and avoid being pulled into things that were never yours to carry in the first place. But this is exactly what makes the idea dangerous. Not because it is wrong, but because it is so easy to use it the wrong way, especially when you are young, exhausted, confused, and still figuring out who you are. Most young people do not arrive at not caring from a place of inner stability. They arrive there from overload, from caring too much for too long, from trying hard without seeing things improve, from feeling like they've given their best and still fallen short. And when you are tired like that, any philosophy that promises relief starts to look like wisdom. The problem is that relief is not the same thing as direction. And when not caring becomes a shortcut to relief, it quietly begins to take things away from you. There is a thin, almost invisible line between letting go of what doesn't matter and avoiding what is uncomfortable but necessary. That line becomes even harder to see when you are tired. Young people often tell themselves, "This isn't worth my energy. Other people's opinions don't matter. I don't owe anyone anything." None of these statements are false. In fact, many of them are healthy. But the real question is not whether they are true. The real question is why you are saying them. Are you freeing yourself, or are you protecting yourself from something you don't want to face? There are responsibilities in life that are not pleasant but are formative. A job that is imperfect but teaches you discipline. A relationship that isn't easy but forces you to communicate, compromise, and grow. A season where you must tolerate awkwardness, incompetence, and failure. When not caring is adopted too early, it becomes a justification for leaving before growth has time to happen. You don't walk away because something is wrong. You walk away because it hasn't yet rewarded you. And the cruel part is that you usually don't realize this until much later, when you look around and feel strangely behind. Not because others were smarter or luckier, but because they stayed long enough for things to compound. Live for yourself is one of the most celebrated messages of our time. It appears in books, social media captions, motivational talks, and casual advice. And it exists for a reason. If you don't learn to live for yourself, you will spend your life performing for other people's expectations. But living for yourself does not mean living without others. When misunderstood, it slowly turns into emotional isolation. It becomes permission to avoid explanation, avoid conflict, avoid repair. Every disagreement is labeled toxic. Every discomfort becomes a boundary violation. Every critique is dismissed as negativity. Over time, relationships start to feel like drains instead of mirrors. You stop asking, "What can I learn here?" and start asking only, "Is this costing me peace?" Eventually, you end up in a very quiet place, safe, controlled, predictable, and deeply lonely. Humans are not meant to be entirely self-contained. We discover who we are through friction, through reflection, through being challenged by people who don't always agree with us. When you cut off relationships too quickly in the name of self-protection, you also cut off opportunities to learn how to stay connected without losing yourself. In this context, not caring is not freedom. It is emotional armor. Here is a truth that is difficult to admit. Sometimes we don't care because we are afraid to try. Trying exposes you. It opens you up to judgment, rejection, and the possibility of discovering that you're not as capable as you hoped. Not trying keeps that risk at a distance. And one of the most effective ways to avoid trying is to declare that the outcome doesn't matter to you. This is a subtle psychological trap. You say you don't care about money, but beneath that is a fear of not being good enough to earn it. You say you don't care about career success, but what you're really afraid of is choosing a path and realizing you chose wrong. You say you don't need a serious relationship, but what you fear is being seen, depended on, and potentially abandoned. Not caring, in these moments, protects your self-image. It allows you to avoid confronting the possibility that effort might not be enough. But fear does not disappear when ignored. It simply changes shape. It waits. It influences decisions quietly, shaping your life from the background. And years later, you may realize that you didn't avoid failure. You avoided participation. One of the most powerful ideas in the subtle art of not giving a F is the question, what pain do you want in your life? It's an honest question. Every path comes with discomfort. The key is choosing the right kind. But this idea assumes something that many young people don't yet have: perspective. When you don't know yourself well, choosing a struggle becomes guesswork. You choose based on trends, stories, and borrowed confidence. You choose freelancing because it sounds free. You choose entrepreneurship because it sounds meaningful. You choose solitude because it sounds strong. Then reality arrives. You discover that freedom comes with instability, that meaning comes with pressure, that solitude comes with silence you weren't prepared to sit with. And suddenly, the struggle you chose feels heavier than you expected. The problem isn't that you chose wrong. The problem is that you didn't understand the cost. When that happens, not caring becomes a way to avoid admitting that you underestimated the trade-offs. It becomes easier to detach than to recalibrate. There is a quiet paradox in trying not to care. The more you suppress emotion, the more disconnected you become from yourself. You tell yourself that sadness is unproductive, that anger is pointless, that disappointment is just unmet expectations. And slowly, you stop listening to what your emotions are trying to tell you. Emotions don't disappear when ignored. They go underground. They show up as chronic fatigue, loss of motivation, vague emptiness. Many young people today don't feel intensely sad or happy. They just feel nothing, and they mistake that numbness for peace. But peace is not the absence of feeling. Peace is the ability to feel without being overwhelmed. When not caring turns into emotional shutdown, it robs you of information. Your emotions exist to signal what matters. When you silence them too early, you lose access to your own values. One of the saddest consequences of misusing not caring is the belief that strength means doing everything alone, that needing support is weakness, that dependence equals loss of freedom. Young people today are incredibly good at enduring silently, so good that no one notices they're struggling. Sometimes not even themselves. Not caring becomes a shell. It keeps others out. It keeps vulnerability contained. It allows you to look fine while feeling exhausted inside. But humans don't become resilient by being independent of everyone. They become resilient by knowing when to lean and who to lean on. The greatest danger of not caring, used incorrectly, is not failure. It is drift. You don't hate your life, but you don't love it either. You're not desperate, just numb. You make safe choices, low-risk decisions. You tell yourself you're fine. Until one day, you look back and realize that you've spent years reacting instead of choosing. Not caring, when detached from self-awareness, can slowly take away your most valuable ability, intentional choice. So the real question is not whether you should care less. It's where your indifference is coming from. Is it coming from clarity or exhaustion? From values or fear? From maturity or self-protection? Not caring is a tool. And like any powerful tool, it can build or destroy depending on how it's used. If there's one question worth carrying forward from this part of the conversation, it's this. Are you not caring because you've chosen consciously? Or because you're afraid to choose at all? After talking about the dangers of not caring, it would be easy to swing to the opposite extreme. To say that the answer is simply to care more, to open yourself back up, to feel everything fully again. But that would only repeat the same mistake in reverse. Caring without discernment is what exhausted many people in the first place. The goal isn't to care more. The goal is to care more honestly. A more mature approach to caring begins with understanding that indifference and obsession are not the only two options. Between them exists a quieter, steadier state, one where you are engaged with life without being consumed by it. Most people burn out not because they care deeply, but because they care blindly. They pour energy into things they don't actually value, into battles they don't need to fight, into expectations that were never truly theirs. Maturity is not about shutting your heart down. It's about learning where your heart belongs. The first shift is realizing that caring is not an emotion. It's a commitment. Emotions fluctuate. Commitment requires choice. When you confuse the two, you either chase intensity or avoid it entirely. But mature caring is less about how strongly you feel and more about what you're willing to stand by when feelings change. This is why mature people often appear calmer. Not because they feel less, but because they've made peace with what deserves their attention and what doesn't. They don't panic every time something goes wrong, not because it doesn't hurt, but because they've already accepted that discomfort is part of the path they chose. Caring well also means accepting trade-offs. Every choice excludes something else. When you say yes to one direction, you say no to many others. Immature caring tries to keep all options open, afraid that committing will lead to regret. Mature caring understands that regret is unavoidable and that clarity comes from choosing anyway. This applies to work, relationships, and even identity. You don't become yourself by avoiding limitation. You become yourself by accepting it. The attempt to care about everything equally often leads to a shallow connection with everything. Depth requires sacrifice. A more grounded way of caring also involves learning to sit with discomfort instead of immediately trying to eliminate it. Many people disengage the moment something becomes emotionally difficult. They label it toxic, draining, or not aligned, when what they're actually experiencing is growth. Not all discomfort is meaningful, but meaningful things almost always come with some discomfort. The difference lies in whether the discomfort is teaching you something or simply depleting you. Mature caring involves staying long enough to learn that difference. It means asking, not, does this feel good right now? But, is this shaping me into someone I respect? This shift takes time, and it requires patience with yourself. There will be moments when you care and get hurt, when you commit and realize you misjudged, when you invest and don't see immediate returns. These experiences are not signs that caring was a mistake. They are how you refine your ability to care. Another essential part of mature caring is allowing others to matter without letting them define you. This is especially difficult in a culture that swings between dependence and isolation. Many people either lose themselves in relationships or keep everyone at arm's length to stay safe. Both extremes come from fear. Caring maturely means being open to connection while remaining anchored in yourself. It means listening without surrendering your agency. It means being influenced without being controlled. This kind of balance is not natural, it's practiced, and it often feels uncomfortable because it asks you to stay present instead of disappearing. Mature caring also requires compassion, especially toward yourself. Many people misuse not caring as a way to escape self-judgment, but then replace it with numbness. A healthier alternative is self-respect. Self-respect allows you to care without constantly punishing yourself for imperfection. It acknowledges effort even when outcomes fall short. This is where maturity quietly shows up. You stop demanding that caring must lead to guaranteed success. You understand that effort doesn't always pay off in the ways you expect, but it still shapes you. You care because caring aligns with who you want to be, not because it promises control. Over time, this approach changes how you experience life. You become less reactive. You don't attach your worth to every result. You engage fully, but you recover more quickly. Disappointment hurts, but it doesn't define you. Perhaps the most important aspect of mature caring is learning to choose your center. There are things you cannot control, and caring about them will only drain you. There are also things that sit at the core of your life: your health, your integrity, your ability to grow, the few relationships that truly matter. These deserve consistent, deliberate care. When you orient your life around that center, everything else finds its place. Opinions lose their power. Comparisons soften. You stop swinging between overinvestment and detachment. You care where it counts, and you let the rest pass without needing to make a statement about it. This doesn't make life easy. It makes it honest. You will still feel tired sometimes. You will still question your choices. You will still care and occasionally regret it. But the exhaustion will be cleaner. The doubts will be clearer. The regrets will teach instead of hollow you out. A more mature way to care is not something you achieve once and keep forever. It's something you practice, especially when it's tempting to shut down. It asks you to stay engaged even when disengagement feels safer, to choose presence over protection. And slowly, almost quietly, something changes. You stop feeling like life is something happening to you. You feel like a participant again. Not because you care about everything, but because you care about what truly matters, and you're willing to carry the weight of that choice. By the time we reach the end of this conversation, the goal isn't to tell you what to care about. It never was. If there's one thing worth remembering, it's that no book, no podcast, no voice from the outside can choose that for you. What we've been circling around this entire time is something quieter and harder to articulate. Not caring was never the problem. Caring blindly was. And caring without awareness is what leaves people exhausted, resentful, and disconnected from themselves. At some point, many of us learned to care as a survival strategy. We cared to be accepted. We cared to avoid disappointing others. We cared because it felt safer to meet expectations than to question them. Over time, that kind of caring becomes heavy. It starts to feel like a burden instead of a choice. And when the weight becomes too much, detachment looks like freedom. But detachment isn't freedom. It's a pause. Sometimes a necessary one, but never the destination. The real work begins after that pause, when you're forced to decide what comes back into your life and what stays out. And that decision is rarely dramatic. It doesn't arrive as a sudden revelation. Most of the time, it shows up in small, ordinary moments, in how you respond to disappointment, in what you give your time to when no one is watching, in whether you stay or leave when something becomes uncomfortable. Choosing what you care about is not about intensity. It's about direction. You don't need to care loudly. You don't need to care perfectly. You don't need to care in a way that looks impressive from the outside. You just need to care in a way that aligns with the kind of person you want to become. This is where many people get stuck. They wait for certainty before committing. They wait until caring feels safe, until the outcome feels guaranteed, until the risk feels manageable. But life rarely offers those conditions. Caring is almost always a leap taken without full clarity. And maturity isn't about eliminating that uncertainty. It's about learning to carry it. You will care and sometimes regret it. You will invest energy into things that don't work out. You will misjudge people. You will choose paths that lead to dead ends. None of this means you failed. It means you participated. A life without regret is not a life well lived. It's a life barely touched. What matters more than avoiding pain is understanding which pain you're willing to accept. Some forms of discomfort hollow you out. Others shape you. The difference is subtle, and it's learned over time, through paying attention, through staying present instead of numbing out, through allowing yourself to feel without immediately needing to escape. Caring maturely doesn't mean opening yourself to everything. It means choosing a center and returning to it again and again. When you know what sits at the core of your life, everything else becomes easier to evaluate. You stop needing to react to every opinion. You stop measuring yourself against timelines that were never yours. You stop confusing urgency with importance. And perhaps most importantly, you stop treating your life like a performance. You stop asking how it looks and start asking how it feels to live it. This doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual shift, one where you become less interested in protecting an image and more interested in building something real. One where you allow yourself to be affected without being undone. One where caring no longer feels like a liability, but like a quiet form of strength. If there's a final question worth leaving you with, it's not, what should I stop caring about? It's something simpler and much harder. What are you willing to carry, even when it's heavy? Because caring is not about being unbothered. It's about being deliberate. It's about choosing, again and again, to stay engaged with the parts of life that give it depth, even when that depth comes with weight. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need a perfect value system. You don't need to be fearless. You just need to be honest about where your energy goes and why. And when you begin to care from that place, not out of obligation or fear, but out of intention, something shifts. Life doesn't become easier, but it becomes clearer. And clarity, more than comfort, is what allows you to move forward without losing yourself along the way. That's where real freedom lives.